Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today we're going to do a review of The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. So just to get it out of the way really quickly, I was sent a copy of this book by the publisher. They actually sent a little package with a tote bag and a pin and a bookmark along with this book, which was awesome. So thank you guys so much. However, that doesn't influence my opinion on the book whatsoever. This is an honest review. This is also a spoiler-free review. So The Raven Tower came out from Orbit Books in the UK on the 28th of February of this year. So it is a fairly new release because today is the 1st of March. And I really wanted to talk about this book because it's a really interesting book. I am a big fan of Ann Leckie's Ancillary Justice, which is an amazing, super weird and awesome mind-bending sci-fi novel. And I actually need to finish up the trilogy because I haven't quite done that yet. But because I am such a big fan of her sci-fi book, I decided to request a copy of her first fantasy novel. So I knew that this would be weird and different and a little bit sort of off the beaten path, but it was really weird and it was really different. And I don't think I would have enjoyed this book if it was written by anyone else, but because it's Ann Leckie and I like her style, I ended up really enjoying this. So I'm going to do my best to explain this because this is kind of a weird and trippy sort of storyline and a lot of the elements are super weird, but I'm going to do my best, so bear with me. So we have two kind of main timelines. This book is split into two. It's told by the same character, and the first timeline is kind of our main plot. So it takes place in the Kingdom of Iridan, and the god the Raven protects the city and the kingdom from attack, from disease, everything. So in exchange for this protection, there is a position called the Raven's Lease, and the Raven's Lease is essentially the ruler, kind of the king of this land. However, the Raven's Lease will sacrifice himself, a human sacrifice, in order to kind of make an offering to this god in exchange for this protection. So we have the Raven's Lease, and then we have the heir. And the story opens with our heir, who is Mawat, and his aide Iolo. And they are riding hard and fast for the city because his father is going to be in the position to kill himself, to die for the Raven. And Mawat is going to have to take over. However, when they arrive, they find out that his father has fled. He has not committed the sacrifice, and everything's kind of in a lot of trouble. His uncle has taken over the throne. So he's convinced that his father did not flee, would never flee, this would never happen because he was literally raised to do this. It's been drilled into his head his whole life. He thinks that something is up. Our second storyline is basically how this god came into existence and how the world has evolved from essentially the beginning of time. This is where I should not have loved this book, but I absolutely adored it. So just to talk about that really quickly, it is all philosophy. And it's all philosophizing, and that is not something I'm even remotely interested in. I don't enjoy that in books. I don't like it when that sort of thing creeps in because it's just not interesting to me. But there was something about this that felt very natural. It felt like the things that this god was considering were things that a god would naturally consider. And the gods are not kind of omniscient, they're not, completely overpowered. They require sacrifice and offerings, and they have to learn the language, they have to learn to communicate with the people who would come to worship them. They can strike deals with other gods, they can help develop humankind, they can come up with these strategies to help their people and help others. And it's really interesting, and it's really well done. So I really liked this god, and I like the fact that a lot of his personality really seeps into his storytelling. He is the strength and patience of the hill. That name is tripping me up so much because it's so long I can never remember it. But the strength and patience of the hill is a wonderful character, and I usually don't like god characters because they're always sort of uninteresting, I guess, in a way that kind of Superman is uninteresting to me because they're all powerful, they're all knowing, and that's not the case in this book, as I've mentioned. In a way, he reminds me a lot of Treebeard, which is wonderful because I love Treebeard. He's very sort of patient, and he ponders for years and years. He thinks about questions. He's happiest when he is alone and he is thinking and pondering and considering. And he has a few sort of friends and companions, and he has the people who worship him, but he is sort of always patient, always quiet, and always considering. And I thought that he was just fantastic. He's kind of the reason I think that this book worked for me. He The other character who I really liked was Iolo himself, and Iolo is really interesting because the story is actually, that first timeline, the story is told to Iolo. So actually this book is told in the second person, which I think will put a lot of people off, but it is something you get used to very quickly. This is the first book that I've read in the second person, and honestly, it didn't bother me that much. I'm really surprised. I really like the fact that Iolo is kind of the perfect contrast to Mawet, and I think the fact that the story is told to Iolo really helped, because if Mawet was truly the main character, I think that this book would have really suffered, because he's literally the worst, which is completely the intention, that's what's supposed to be happening here, but he's completely spoiled and has the worst temper and doesn't listen to anyone and is snappish and just literally the worst, one of my least favorite characters ever. But Iolo is the perfect contrast to him in that he's very clever and he kind of keeps his mouth shut and he observes. And I really enjoyed that. I really love the fact that he and the god sort of complement each other really well, and I think that's one of the reasons that this book worked so well in terms of characters. I loved the kind of world building in this book because it feels ancient. It feels very old. It feels kind of like, to me it had kind of a Mesopotamian feel to it, and I really liked that because it's not the standard sort of, you know, European fantasy novel that we get so much, which I love, but it's also nice to get something different, and I'm very glad we got that in this book. I really liked the way that the gods interact with their people, and again, these deals that they kind of strike, and the way that they can protect from sickness, but they have to do this in order to do this, and what kind of promises will create sort of big issues later on, what's going to have like the worst power drain on them. All of that's really interesting to me. I loved the way that the gods strongly tie into this world. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, but I think I might actually up that rating. I need to think about it a little bit. I actually finished this book earlier this morning, and I have a feeling it's going to be one that stays with me for a while because of that really interesting philosophy, because of that second timeline that I found so fascinating. You just don't see stuff like that in fantasy these days, at least not the fantasy that I read. I would love to know what you think of The Raven Tower, if you have read it, if it's in your TBR, if you're interested in reading this now, if you've read her other books, go ahead and leave me a comment below. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead, hit subscribe, and check back soon, and I will see you next time.